You didn't land here by luck. You were admitted. When a culture spends centuries warning you away from a book, that is not piety. It's a tell. It means someone decided you would be easier to manage if a few doors stayed closed. Here, you're going to test one of those doors, and if you feel your pulse quicken, good. That feeling is older than censorship and smarter than fear. The Book of Enoch is not a side quest. It's a breach in the wall. Scripture gives you a single strange line. Enoch walked with God and was no more, and then moves on. Enoch doesn't move on. It opens the file everyone pretends isn't there. Watchers who cross a boundary, gifts handed down too early, appetites that grow into giants, a world reset, and one witness who is taken, not killed. You don't have to accept every detail as literal to feel what the story is doing. It is not trying to entertain you. It is trying to wake your discernment. You have been trained to hear ancient names and go numb. Angels, giants, must be myth. That reflex is not intelligence. It's conditioning. Ask a cleaner question. Who benefits when you treat all precise claims as fairy tales? Because Enoch is precise. It names leaders, crimes, punishments. It describes rooms of fire and crystal, engines of weather, gates in the sky, and a throne whose brightness makes language stumble. That kind of specificity is hard to argue with and very easy to hide. Stay with me. Next, you'll meet the oath that bends the timeline. 200 watchers who were assigned to observe and chose to interfere. Before we step into that scene, hold this rule in your hands like a compass. If the truth were harmless, it wouldn't need to be buried. You can test that claim anywhere. Religion, politics, technology. It never fails. When a text is removed, not because it's false, but because it's difficult, you have found a mirror that shows too much. Here is what you get for listening. Not sensationalism. Not a new superstition to decorate your shelf. You get a way to read forbidden material without losing your balance. You learn to recognize the shape of a cover-up, and you learn what to do when power offers you gifts before you have the spine to carry them. Enoch is a story about angels, yes, but it is also a manual for staying human when power gets clever. You are going to notice something else. The way this book changes how you read your own century. It explains why tools can move faster than character. It shows how glamour can dress up violence, and how knowledge without reverence turns into leverage. If any part of your life feels like it is ruled by brilliant appetites with empty hearts, you already know why this story refuses to die. Perhaps you feel chosen right now. That isn't ego. That's recognition. You recognize the tone of a message that waited until you were ready. You felt the pressure of being told to stop asking certain questions. You've watched timelines collapse when shiny inventions arrive. You've seen whole rooms praise progress while becoming meaner. Enoch doesn't ask you to panic. It asks you to notice. There is one more reason you're here. Early believers read this book. Wilderness communities copied it. A brief New Testament letter quotes it out loud, as if everyone already knows the line. That means something. Later, when empire and institution needed a tighter story, Enoch was ushered to the side. Not with a public debate, with a quiet exclusion. If you've ever watched a meeting where the most inconvenient report never makes the agenda, you know exactly how important things disappear. So this is your invitation and your warning. You are going to be offered an older explanation for why the world breaks. Not humans are bad and that's all, but boundaries exist and power hates them. You will be offered a map for what happens when boundaries fail. Gifts arrive too early, Appetites scale, the earth groans, and judgment isn't cruelty, it's repair. If that makes your shoulders drop with a strange relief, that's because some part of you has been waiting for a story that treats you like an adult. Next, you will step onto Mount Hermon with the Watchers as they swear the oath that rewrites history. Keep your attention tight. Feel what your body does when a forbidden door opens and the room on the other side is not chaos, but order you were told to ignore. You did not find this by accident. You were admitted. And once you see why this book had to be buried, you'll start to hear the machinery of burying everywhere, and you won't be available to it anymore. Here is the hinge where your stomach drops. 200 beings assigned to observe, not interfere, swear an oath on a mountain and cross the line. They choose desire over duty, speed over wisdom, spectacle over silence. If you've ever watched power talk itself into breaking a rule because no one will get hurt, you already know the tone of the night on Hermon. They descend like teachers without permission slips. What they bring looks like progress. The secret of shaping metal until it bites. Polishes that turn faces into masks. Enchantments that tilt outcomes. Root cutting that drugs the will. Star maps that trade reverence for control. The arithmetic of months and signs as if fate were a calendar you could bully. Tools arrive before character. Knowledge arrives without the ceremony of responsibility. You feel that sentence in your bones because you live in a century built on it. At first, no one resists a gift. Crops improve, blades shimmer. The night sky becomes a board you can play. But gifts that arrive out of season always invoice the future. Violence learns a faster path. Vanity gets mirrors. The heart learns to pose while the conscience learns to sleep. Enoch doesn't wink at any of this. He names names and consequences. He shows you that the shortest road from wonder to ruin is a straight line drawn by impatience. Their children come next. Nephilim, not charming giants, but appetites with reach. They devour the harvest, then the herds, then the hands that fed them. They do not build cultures, they drain them. The ground remembers, the rivers thicken, the air itself feels used. Even the animals change, spliced and pushed beyond their natures until the world looks like a sketch overwritten too many times. If you've ever looked at a feed, a skyline, or a conscience and thought, this wasn't meant to be stretched like that, you are hearing the same alarm the earth was sounding then. And still, people argue for the gifts. That is how corruption keeps a straight face, by reminding you of the convenience it bought. But look how sharp the tools are. Look how bright the city is. As if brightness were innocence. As if sharpness were wisdom. You can respect ingenuity and still recognize trespass. The Watchers were not punished for teaching. They were punished for teaching without authority, outside timing, against trust. Now watch the counter-move. The archangels do not arrive as cartoon heroes. They arrive as the boundary reasserting itself. The giants tear each other apart. The flood doesn't rage. It resets. The ringleaders are bound, named, and scheduled for judgment. And in the middle of the court stands a human with a pen. Enoch is told to write, not to impress you with theology, but to preserve a record of what happens when power forgets why it was given. This specificity is what makes the book hard to domesticate. Enoch speaks of crystalline halls and engines of weather, of doors in the sky and prisons beneath the deep. You are free to call it metaphor if you like, but don't miss what the metaphors refuse to let you ignore. Boundaries are real, and violating them has a cost that arrives even if the invoice is delayed. That is not superstition. That is moral physics. Here is where the story reaches into your century and grips your wrist. You have watched a different kind of watcher descend. Platforms, systems, tools that can summon 1,000 faces to your pocket, offer you glamour, numbers, leverage, and a crown made of notifications. None of those things are evil. All of them want you early. All of them whisper, you can have the power first. You can find the spine later. You know how that plot resolves. It always produces giants, habits and hungers so large they eat your attention, then your patience, then your peace. So the question is not, did angels really teach metallurgy? The question is, who is handing you tools, and what part of you do they want to skip? If the answer is the part that would learn restraint, you've identified a watcher by another name. And if you feel a sting as you say that out loud, good. Enoch is doing its work. You might ask, why not just let humans learn the hard way? Because a world can be ruined faster than a conscience can regenerate. That is the logic behind judgment in this story. It is not a tantrum from heaven. It is a firewall tripping before the server melts. Mercy sometimes looks like a shutdown. You've seen that in miniature. The relationship you had to end. The habit you had to starve. The room you had to leave even though it glittered. Judgment, rightly understood, is a form of care. Stay with me here, because the next move is the one that makes you feel chosen instead of doomed. Enoch is not written to make you fear the sky. It is written to make you responsible on the ground. You are not asked to renounce knowledge. You are asked to insist on timing. You are not told to distrust power. You are told to keep it tethered to love. You are not trained to chase angels. You are trained to notice oaths, what they promise, what they cross, and who pays when they break. If right now you can name one gift in your life that arrived too early, one brilliant tool that outpaced your character, you already know how to read the rest of this story. You repent by retiming your power. You put the weapon down until you can hold it without becoming a giant. That is adult faith. That is how a person walks with God in a century of shortcuts. Next, you'll watch how a book like this gets buried without a bonfire, how it is starved of legitimacy, then starved of attention, until only a stubborn remnant keeps copying it in the dark. Before we go there, take one sentence with you like a seal on your wrist. Gifts without guardians become curses. Say it on the days the upgrades arrive. Say it when the mirror flatters you. Say it when your cleverness starts to argue for crossing the line. The Watchers descended once. You are surrounded by their cousins, and you are not here to be easy to manage. You are here to be awake. You don't need fire to erase a book. You need paperwork. First you starve it of legitimacy, then you starve it of attention, and finally you tell the next generation it was never that important. That is the whole trick. If you've ever watched a meeting where the most inconvenient report simply never makes the agenda, you already understand canon making in its least noble mood. Early on, Enoch breathed normal air. Wilderness communities copied it. Travelers carried it along trade routes. A brief New Testament letter quotes it out loud, as if everyone listening already knows the line. That should make you pause. People who stood closer to the sources read this book without flinching. No sirens, no disclaimers. Just a text among texts, vivid and unruly, sitting beside psalms and prophecies like a relative who speaks too plainly at dinner. Then the incentives changed. Faith aligned with empire. Doctrine had to be administrable. Outliers had to be domesticated. You don't defeat a voice like Enoch by arguing with every line. You put the shelf behind a locked door and give the key a new name: order. The playbook writes itself. Step 1. Reframe. Call it myth, fringe, apocrypha. Not false, just unsafe for public reading. You haven't disproved it. You've renamed it into silence. Step 2. Relocate. Remove it from the prayers and the pulpit. If a text isn't heard, it isn't remembered. If it isn't remembered, it can be rediscovered later and treated like a curiosity, not a witness. Step 3. Isolate the readers. Anyone who still loves the book gets a label: eccentric, extremist, mystical. You don't ban them, you belittle them. Social gravity does the rest. Step 4. Reward forgetfulness. Promote voices that never make you ask hard questions about power, timing, and trespass. The smoother the story, the easier it is to govern. Notice what none of these steps require: a proof that the book is wrong. The burial is procedural, not intellectual. That's why it works. And yet, the book refused to die. An African church kept it in their Bible and copied it for centuries. Monasteries to the east held a different Enoch that mapped 10 heavens like a cartographer of the unseen. Desert caves coughed up fragments that proved it was older than the smear campaign claimed. A traveler brought complete manuscripts north, and scholars had to say the quiet part aloud. The legend was real, ancient, and inconvenient. Why does this matter to you? Because the technique never retired. You still live in an age where ideas are not usually burned. They are deplatformed by politeness. A report is not best practice. A witness is not in scope. A question is too speculative for the audience. The tone is smooth, the minutes are clean, and yet a living thing has just been sealed in a file. So here is your benefit for staying with this story. You learn to detect a burial in real time. 4 tells. 1. The category swap. When the question is factual, but the answer is, that's not the kind of thing we read here. You're not in a library. You're in a lobby. 2. The schedule dodge. If a topic is always postponed to the next meeting, it isn't being evaluated. It's being starved. 3. The credential curtain. If you're told you may ask only after earning 3 new badges, someone is protecting status, not truth. 4. The orphaned quote. When a tradition quietly keeps lines from a text, but disowns the text that birthed them, the family is hiding an ancestor. Enoch sharpens your eyes for those moves. It also confronts you with a choice. You can join the burial and enjoy the calm of small answers. Or you can keep reading, slowly, sanely, without superstition, and accept the cost of adult curiosity. Adult curiosity says, if a book was copied by the stubborn, quoted by the early, and silenced by the comfortable, I will at least hear it out. There is a gentler reason some communities let Enoch drift: survival. After catastrophe, leaders reach for stability. They trim the shelf to protect the center. You can honor that instinct and still name the loss. Because part of maturity is admitting that safety, misused, becomes another form of censorship. The question is never only, what do we keep out? The higher question is, what courage do we need to keep the whole truth in? Keep your attention on the human in the middle of all this. A man who walked with God and was not is told to write, because memory is what boundaries use to speak to the future. Enoch's pages are not a dare to chase monsters. They're a record of what happens when power hands out gifts without waiting for character. That record was inconvenient to governors then and now, which is exactly why you're holding it. Before we move on, look at the irony that makes censors grind their teeth. Burying a book often preserves it. The very act of exclusion brands it with a glow that says, look here. It finds exiles, It finds the patiently curious. It finds you. And once it finds you, it hands you the skill the gatekeepers fear most. The ability to compare stories across borders. Because that is our next step. We're going to widen the frame and notice how many civilizations remember the same pattern with different names. Skyborn teachers, boundary crossings, hybrid appetites, resets. I am not asking you to swallow every claim. I'm asking you to admit that agreements this broad are data. When data refuses to fit a narrow story, adults revise the story. Hold the thread. You are not here to collect esoteric trivia. You are here to reclaim a faculty that modern life keeps trying to sedate. The part of you that recognizes when something true has been pushed out of sight because it rearranges the room. In the next chapter, you'll see how that out-of-sight pattern shows up in myth after myth, continent after continent, until denial starts to look less like skepticism and more like strategy. The moment you stop sneering at old stories, they start agreeing with each other. Different tongues, same memory. Civilizations separated by oceans remember taller, older, brighter beings who taught, ruled, trespassed, and were finally opposed. Call them Anunnaki or Titans, Jutnar or Asuras, Nejeru or Dragon Kings. Change the costumes, the plot holds. Visitors from the high places cross a line, hand out tools, amplify appetites, and force a reset. You were trained to call that coincidence. You were trained to smirk. You smirk less when the echoes stack this high. Why does your century hate that pattern? Because if it's real, then boundary keeping is not small-minded piety. It's civilization's immune system. If it's real, then progress must be judged by timing, not speed. If it's real, then power can be both dazzling and out of order at the same time. And you know that truth in your bones because you've watched brilliant people break simple vows and call it growth. There's a second reading you're allowed to carry without canceling the first. Treat the watchers as literal beings and also as a grammar for your inner world. On the outside, they descend with gifts that arrive too early. On the inside, they are the part of you that demands the crown before you've grown the spine. Intelligence that outruns humility. Charm that outruns conscience. Discipline that outruns love. Those inner watchers also produce giants, outsized hungers that devour your harvest, then devour you. When Enoch says the earth groaned, he isn't only talking about soil, he's talking about lives stretched past their design. Look at your timeline, and you'll see the same choreography with new uniforms. Platforms that promise omnipresence, metrics that promise meaning, images that promise belonging. None of it is evil by nature. All of it is early by design. Early is the point. Early bypasses the rituals that make a human safe to trust with reach. Early makes you clever before it makes you kind. Early offers you a ladder and laughs when you forget to build a floor. This is where the benefit you were promised becomes practical. You need a way to read forbidden material without becoming gullible, and a way to read your modern feed without becoming numb. The pattern gives you both. When a story says, "They descended," ask what descended in your week. When a text says, "They taught crafts and signs," ask which tools in your hand demand a self you haven't grown. When it says, "Giants consumed the land," ask what appetite in you eats everything you give it and then asks for more. The pattern is not there to scare you. It is there to make your choices expensive again. You can feel how this changes the temperature of your mind. Cynicism cools, discernment warms. You stop laughing at myths long enough to notice their traction on your calendar. You begin to suspect that ancient people weren't naive. They were watching the same sequence you are, closer to the ground, with fewer distractions and better ears. And once you see that, a door opens that no gatekeeper can close. You can take a text seriously without surrendering your reason. You can hold a mystery in your hands without putting your brain on mute. There is a temptation here, and you already know it's sent, to chase spectacle. Names, ranks, secret maps, the glittering inventory of the unseen. Resist it. Enoch does not court you with trivia. It trains you to measure power by its obedience to purpose. The story is not asking you to sprint after angels. It is asking you to become the kind of person who can be trusted with a tool and not become a giant. That is rarer than visions and harder than theories, which is why most communities quietly retire the books that demand it. Notice what happens to your posture when you accept this. Your curiosity grows teeth. You stop being easy to shepherd with slogans. You stop handing your sovereignty to whoever flatters your fear or your vanity. You start hearing the hum beneath the hymn, the smooth managerial tone that tells you which questions are not helpful, which witnesses are out of scope, which archives are better left to experts. You don't rage. You don't rant. You take notes. You compare stories across borders. And you refuse the oldest bribe of all, comfort in exchange for silence. If right now you feel like someone finally said out loud what you have been sensing for years, that is the recognition that keeps people in the room. You are not being entertained. You are being conscripted into adulthood. Adulthood does not sneer and it does not faint. It looks at the agreement across centuries. Sky beings, boundary breaks, hybrid appetites, resets, and says, I will live as if this is data. Then it turns to the one part of the story everybody forgets. The human who is told to write so that memory can speak past the censors. Hold still for the turn. Patterns are useless unless they lead to a vow. You are not here to admire the geometry of myth. You are here to recover the courage that makes a boundary feel like love instead of loss. What begins as a catalog of giants ends as a mirror. Do you love speed more than goodness, glamour more than truth, reach more than responsibility? The answer you give in private is the world you build in public. In the final chapter, we return to the question that started the burial. Why this book had to go quiet, and why you, of all people, were allowed to hear it again. If you stay for that, the pattern will stop being a story you know and become a posture you carry. You won't need permission. You won't need a badge. You will walk with the one gift every empire fears, a conscience that cannot be outsourced, and a memory that cannot be managed. They didn't hide Enoch because it was silly. They hid it because it says the quiet part out loud. Authority can go rogue. Technology can outrun love. Rank is not righteousness. And when a world crosses its boundaries long enough, judgment comes as repair, not revenge. That is not a message for docile citizens. That is a map for adults. You are hearing it now because the pattern Enoch names has come back wearing modern clothes, and someone in you is tired of being handled. Look around. Power arrives earlier and earlier. Tools promise reach before you grow a spine. Feeds promise meaning without memory. The new watchers don't descend on mountains. They land in your hand. They offer brightness, speed, leverage. They ask one small favor in return. Skip the part where you become the kind of person who can be trusted with any of it. That is the oath you are asked to sign every morning. That is why this book had to go quiet. It trains you to say no. You were allowed to see it because you're old enough, in spirit, to use a harder story. Hard stories don't flatter you. They hand you boundaries and call them love. They tell you gifts are holy when they arrive in season, and curses when they arrive early. They insist that glamour without obedience is just a costume for appetite. They ask you to stop borrowing language you haven't earned, and to stop calling rest cowardice when it's really restraint. What do you take from this, practically, when the episode ends and your life begins again? You take a way of reading dangerous things without becoming gullible. When you meet a bright idea, you ask who benefits from your confusion. When you meet a new tool, you ask which boundary it wants you to cross. When you meet a voice that tells you not to read, you ask what cracks if you do. You don't rage. You don't sneer. You note the answers and act as if they are true. You also take a way of reading yourself. You stop treating your inner watchers like angels just because they shine. Intelligence that outruns humility is still a trespasser. Charm that outruns conscience is still a thief. Discipline that outruns love is still a weapon in the wrong hands. You know this because you've seen versions of yourself get powerful before they got kind. You can love that younger self and still refuse to repeat him. Here is the sentence no censor wants you to memorize. Boundaries are not prison. They are custody of power. When you honor them, your tools stop owning you. Your pace returns. Your attention shrinks back to a human scale. The giants in your life don't vanish in smoke. They starve. And the people around you can breathe again, because you stopped mistaking your appetites for your destiny. You might still wonder about the flood, the prisons, the halls of fire, the doors in the sky. You're allowed to wonder. But notice what happens when you let the wonder do its work. You become precise. You stop letting abstractions blur misconduct. You stop letting myth be an excuse to stay childish. You begin to live inside the line Enoch draws. Power in season, knowledge in order, awe without abdication. That is the kind of awe this age forgot, one that makes you steadier, not softer. Why were you admitted? Because burying a book doesn't work on a person who has learned to remember. Because someone in you has been practicing not to blink when the room says, "Don't ask that." Because you have felt the cost of early gifts and would rather be trusted than impressed. Because whisper by whisper, your life has been moving toward a sentence that sounds like a verdict and reads like a blessing. You walked with God, and you were not. For sale, for panic, for flattery, for capture. If you carry only one change from today, let it be this posture. Slow enough to be moral, brave enough to be curious, stubborn enough to keep your sovereignty when the oaths start circling. The watchers will keep descending. They always do. But the story does not end with them. It ends with a human who writes, so the future can tell the difference between a gift and a trap. You didn't find this by accident. You were admitted. Walk with that knowledge. Walk like someone who knows why a thing gets buried and why it refuses to stay dead. Walk until the old sentence becomes true in the middle of your ordinary day. You walked with God, and you were not.